We had teachers approach my daughter, when this first happened, being like, hey, I heard your dad sold for X amount.
No way. If you're a man between the ages of 30 and 45, today's episode is about a dream that all of you definitely have had before. And if you're a woman, you maybe have had this, but I'm a man, so I can tell you that most every man I know has had this dream. You see, the episode is with my friend Travis, and Travis is worth around $50 million. And yet, Travis lives in a town of around 2,400 people. And I don't mean one of these small communities near a major city. I mean out in the middle of nowhere. A tiny, dark, cold, rural area of Canada. It's his hometown.
I'm a fifth generation.
939er.
My great-great-grandfather was one of the founders. My dad was a school teacher here for, 30 years. So my kids are sixth generation.
So why is this interesting? Well, Travis can live anywhere with his net worth. However, he chooses to stay in his small town. And the reason being is Travis and his business, they own the nicest office building in the center of the town. They host barbecues for the towns. Dozens of people within the town work at his company. And they almost use his office like a community center, which kind of makes Travis almost like the unofficial mayor of his town. And in this episode, Travis makes an amazing case for why you should consider living in a small town like this. And I've got to be honest, he's kind of convincing. So what's going on? This is Sam Parr, and this podcast is called Moneywise. There's 1,000 types of content out there that will teach you how to get rich, and frankly, a lot of it's junk. But there's not a lot of content out there that teaches you how to handle all the problems and weird feelings that come with being wealthy and making a lot of money. And because I'm co-founder of a company called Hampton, which is a community for CEOs and business owners and thus kind of high net worth people, I'm able to see thousands of amazing but private conversations about money that, in my opinion, should be shared. And that, my friend, is what this podcast, Moneywise, is all about. With Moneywise, we talk to people who have made a ton of money, and we talk about how it changed their lives, which means they get brutally honest about their finances, meaning their monthly expenses, their net worth, their portfolios. And so they're going to be super transparent about all of their numbers, which I think is the only place on the internet that you can find this stuff. But they're also going to get real about their personal challenges that come with the successes that they've had and how they're managing and handling all them. And by the way, if you're a CEO of a startup or founder of a startup, you guys have to check out my company. It's called joinhampton.com. It's, in my opinion, the best place on the internet to connect with like-minded peers. So people who run businesses that are doing potentially tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. Check it out, joinhampton.com. Not only does Travis live in
Springfield,
he also founded and runs his business out of it. Because of that, the fact that he's wealthy isn't exactly a well-kept secret. However, he does say that people vastly underestimate his true worth.
It was a publicly traded business that bought us. And so, they send out press releases, gossip flies, but I don't think people knew exact numbers.
We're going to talk about all the cool things in this episode, including all the pros and cons of living in the middle of nowhere. And we're going to talk about what it's like to run a tech company this size out of such a small town. But first, you know the drill. Let's talk about Travis's $50 million net worth and how it happened in spite of never leaving his really small town. It started with a company he founded with a group of buddies. The company largely operated out of America, which means because Travis was based in Canada, that meant a ton of traveling. Too much traveling.
I had 3 kids. My son was in age for T-ball. I loved baseball growing up. And I was traveling back and forth from Baltimore, Maryland to Canada one summer. And I was gone and back and forth so much that I didn't actually get to go to a single baseball game. I missed his complete first year of baseball. And that just crushed me. I was like, I am not going to be one of these kind of dads.
And so he quit and he started looking for a new income source.
I had a lot of energy, a lot of ambition. I wanted to find a type of business that I could kind of funnel that into. And right out of the gate, I was, I'll be happy if I can make $200,000 a year. That would be like, I'd be living the life in my small town. I'd be happy. Obviously, things became a lot more successful in that, but my motivation wasn't money at the beginning.
This was in 2011 when Travis was 29 years old. At this point, he had saved up quite a bit of money.
My net worth would have been right around 800,000 US. And when I say US, I'm from Canada, right? So everything's like USD Canadian. It would have been over $1 million Canadian, but 800,000 US is what my net worth was.
So with a safety net and a good amount of time on his hands, Travis started his new business,
the Globex Corporation.
there was a fellow, entrepreneur in town. One of my friends, he owned a,
Nuclear power plant.
so we got together and kind of started the first online option, launched that in 2012. So we've had it for quite a few years,
How big is it now?
just under 30 million of revenue this year.
What was your first like 4 or 5 years of revenue and profit?
No profit. I mean, we didn't make a profit our first 5 years for sure. Our first year was maybe 150,000. Our second year,
Revenue or profit?
gross revenue, 150. And then from there, we probably did 300,000 to 400,000 of revenue. And then from there, we went from, to 2-3 million up to 5 million to 11 million, 16 million. And then, from there, it was up a couple million a year after that.
That's crazy. So year 1, you're at 150. Year 4, you're around 5. But then year 5, you're around 11 million. That's crazy good. What were you paying yourself as you went?
We didn't pay ourselves for the first 4 years of the business. I believe on our 5th year, we decided, we need to talk to our accountant and our lawyer and realized, we're onto something as a financial institution that could be worth something to sell. We need to normalize our costs. So we paid ourselves $100,000 that year. And then from there, we went up to 150, slowly increased it to around 200,000 the last few years.
During these first few years, Travis was living pretty cheap, investing everything he had back into the business. By the way, when we're talking about a town with 2,400 people, cheap means something maybe a little bit different than New York, Chicago, San Francisco, that type of thing.
15 grand there would be like 40 grand in an urban bigger city. So
At age 30, 32, 33, what was your monthly expenses?
well, at that time, I mean, few kids, we were probably only spending 45, 50 grand a year.
Roughly $4,000 a month is 50,000. So, and you felt you were living nice.
Yeah. I don't think my kids felt like they went without anything. I felt like we still went on a couple trips a year, not crazy trips, but I felt like we did pretty good.
Fast forward to 2021, and that $50,000 a year is about to look like a drop in the bucket.
Our first exit was a $100 million valuation. We sold the majority of our business to
Springfield Elementary Casino.
and then have a ongoing relationship to grow the business and have another exit in the future. My partner and I, we each got close to $25 million would have been the number that we got when we sold.
Each. And $25 million in any place, particularly if you're young, is plenty. That's a lot of money. $25 million in St. Louis, where I'm from, you're like one of the richest people, and that's a 1 million person town. You're probably one of the wealthier people, particularly if you're under 40. That's like you, a professional athlete. Now, 25 million, if you're you at a 2,500 person town, you're like the richest person. Is that right?
I mean, my business partner has me there, but he's got 10 years on me too, right? I always bug him that I'm going to catch you because I got 10 more years for compounding interest.
But
yeah,
you two are the guys.
yeah, us two would be the largest wealth creation in our town.
$25 million was a life-changing amount for Travis and his family. If he wanted to, he could live in the best cities in the world with endless amenities, world-class education, amazing weather, all of that. But that's the thing. He didn't want to. In fact, moving didn't even cross his mind.
I like where I live, right? When we got married and decided to start a family, we specifically wanted to raise our kids here. And so this, I think, will always be our base.
In the next 20 minutes, you're gonna find out how Travis nearly convinced me to pack up my house and move to a small town in the middle of nowhere. And look, I know that it's gonna sound like the grass is always greener, and there's a ton of downsides to this, and we're gonna talk about those too. But we're gonna start with something Travis realized right away, right after that first $25 million hit his bank account, which is staying in a small town was the best way to ground himself.
I was always stressed leading up to the exit of going from no money to a lot of money, of being like, look, I have to really focus on making sure this doesn't change me, right? Because, you hear you're on, you run podcasts, people always talk about how money is just an amplifier. It magnifies who you are. And one of the things about a small town is you kind of want to stay quiet and under the radar. You don't want to be super flashy. And I like that. I didn't want to go out and buy a bunch of sports cars or, spend my money on things. I wanted to take a few years, get it invested, see how the investments are doing, and then hopefully as I see that wealth grow, I'll loosen up a little bit.
On the other end of that, even though Travis leans into other folks' perceptions to keep him in check, he admits that maybe he puts a little bit too much stock in other people's opinions.
I probably need to go to therapy over like not worrying about what people think. One of my buddies who is very successful told me once, how the saying in Japan where they talk about like the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. And so there's a little bit of that in a small town. My wife, it doesn't bother my wife at all. For me, it does because I was born and raised here.
She doesn't mind sticking out, is what you're saying?
She doesn't care what people think. She only cares about what, her family, her friends. I'm still worried about what people think. It bugs me, but I'm getting better. I'm getting a little bit wiser and realizing that, it is what it is. I'm an honest person. I've tried to treat my employees well, and if we want to add a gym onto our house, we'll add a gym onto our house.
Oh, so you think about that stuff. You're like, because you're like the work, even if no one sees the home, like some worker is going to tell some guy like, oh, I got a job at this guy's house.
Well, our primary residence here in our town, we're adding a huge basketball court. So now our house is like a 9,000 square foot house, right? We do stick out and people drive by and see that and text me, what are you building? You putting in a swimming pool? So-and-so told me you were doing this. And it's just like, no. I'm just,
Big news travels fast in a small town. Travis didn't just move to a random place under the radar. He continued to upscale his life in the same small town he and his family on both sides are from, which means people know a lot. And they're going to be very, very nosy. That's something that he and his family have had to learn to deal with.
We had teachers approach my daughter, when this first happened, being like, hey, I heard your dad sold for X amount.
No way.
Yeah, like at the local convenience store. And my daughter, who's like grade 10, is like, oh, I don't know. Maybe you should ask him. I knew that was going to happen. I knew
How inappropriate. That's insane to me.
Completely inappropriate. But it didn't surprise me. And so that's why we wanted to coach them and we wanted to help them understand. And we also went over what this means to them.
Let me ask you about that. First of all, I didn't even think about that of you have to coach them what to say and what not to say. And you were like, I am wealthy. You're not. I am. And if someone wants to know, just say you don't know because you don't. That's like a crazy script.
Yeah. And my daughter, she would get it a little bit, walking into class and she'd have a pair of new Jordans or something, right? And like, oh, rich kid, like kids trying to like tease her or whatever. And she's like, she's confident. She's like, rich, you mean my dad's rich? I'm not. Like she would like, throw it on them. And it died down after a while. That first year, there was a lot of comments, but it kind of died down.
Do people give your kids a hard time because they know who you are in your town?
No, they don't. I think the vast majority of people are very happy for our family. They know who we are. We're not flashy people, but there's the 5%, right? There are those crabs that want to reach up and grab and pull you down. But as for my kids, they've got a good group of peers. Again, why I wanted to raise them here. I think if I lived in New York and I had this kind of money and they went to private school, they would be with a bunch of other kids whose parents are way more wealthy than I am. And so it's been good for them too to realize that, we are blessed and they don't have to stress out completely.
I'm looking at your town on Google Maps on Street View. I've owned a ranch in a little small town like this. I was afraid of getting robbed.
Oh, it's like the safest place on earth, this place.
Yeah, I feel you. And I know statistically it's unlikely, but I'm just saying like when people know that it's the guy, I know where he lives. I know that, he's probably not home right now because I see his car's not there. And because I know his routine a little bit because I see him at the store every day. He's probably at the store. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Are you fearful of that?
So not to make myself look like paranoid, right before we did our acquisition, I actually went and wrote my restricted firearms license so I could get a handgun because it's like impossible to get a handgun in Canada, right? So we haven't had any problems. Obviously, I think most people know like people with wealth don't have millions of dollars of cash laying around.
You might have a couple rollies in your closet.
We got a security system set up, but I don't worry about that where I live at all. I know that sounds like naive, but Sam, literally, if you came to our town, you'd be like, okay, I get it. Like, we live in the same town of like The Sandlot, like one of my favorite movies. Like, it's like 1950s small town America.
So how much money can you really spend with a $50 million net worth on a family of 6 in a town akin to a 1950s small town America? It's time, my friend, to get to my favorite part, the numbers. What is your burn now?
Probably around 240, 20 grand a month.
What type of cars do you have?
I drive a Toyota Tundra. I got to have a truck, right? It's a city truck. I'm not a farmer or anything, but I drive a Tundra. My wife drives a Grand Cherokee, a nice one, like a L. It's got the 3 extra seats. And then I got an old beater F-150. That's my dump truck. That's what I take to the dump when I do my yard work and stuff. So those are my vehicles.
We're not going to see you driving around in a fat Benz or anything. I mean, that you'd
No.
stick out a little bit. I don't even know could someone change, like, could you even get a tire guy out there?
You'd have to get it towed up to, 2 hours away, and you got we still got roads that aren't even paved in the town. So there's potholes and stuff. I put money into a boat, a nice surf boat for my kids to, for us to enjoy down at the lake. So again, I think my Toyota Tundra is freaking awesome. Like, I wouldn't want to drive anything else than that.
Oh, and the house he mentioned a few minutes ago, he's been living there for nearly a decade, and he actually moved there 6 years before his first $25 million exit.
In my town, in 2015, I built a house, including the basement, right? That's finished, 6,000 square foot house. I maybe put in, including the lot, 800,000.
So instead of spending money just buying or building a bigger house, he just pours money into renovations, making it something that he likes a lot more.
So yeah, my house is one of the bigger houses. It's a newer house in town. I am adding, one of the things that we did decide to splurge on is we're adding an addition on a basketball court and a gym onto the side of our house. So, winters up here are pretty nasty. So somewhere the kids can go and their friends. So that was a splurge, adding a gym and a weight room onto our house. That's probably our biggest purchase that we've made locally.
Locally is a key word. Not being super flashy in his town doesn't mean he doesn't like to enjoy his money.
My wife and I are like, look, we're going to spend our money outside of where we live more than we spend where we do live, right? So traveling is a big thing. We always try to find, experiences we can take our kids. We're going to Nashville in October to a couple concerts. We go to Hawaii at least once a year. We go on 4 or 5 trips a year.
He also put money into a lake house.
Yeah, personal property. It's a lake property down in Montana. We bought 3.5 acres on a lake there. We're building kind of our, dream lake compound place for family, friends as the kids get older. No matter where my kids end up moving or, going to school and living, I wanted a place where they're going to want to come back, and that's our lake property. So we made a large investment in that up front, knowing that that's a long-term investment for us.
How much is that property worth?
About 4 million Canadian.
It must be a lot of acres, I guess, in a beautiful home, because $4 million in most regions is awesome. And maybe your region, it's like extra awesome.
It's awesome. We love it. It's getting close to being done, but I should be able to sleep easily 45, 50 people at this property.
Does that change your happiness?
Yes. You could tell I smile when I say that, or?
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I never wanted wealth for things. I wanted wealth for memories,
And that creates them.
Yeah. And it's a way to share, my cousins, my friends, I want this place used. If we're not there, it's not going to be locked up and like, no, you can't go. Like, I want people to go down there, use it. It's a way for other people to be able to experience or get some joy out of the money we've been able to make, right? And share that. So that was kind of our dream.
When you're budgeting to do a $4 million second home, do you bake in how much cost it's going to be to maintain throughout the years, or you don't care?
Yeah, I mean, in Montana, property taxes are very reasonable. So I've looked at it, but it's going to be 25 grand a year all in.
No,
right?
no big
For
deal.
Utilities and taxes, yeah. So that wasn't a big concern of ours. No homeowners association down on the lake in Montana.
Finally, on the money front, let's talk about his investments. And by the way, for his wealth management, he actually kept it very local.
Focusing on fees was my main target. I was able to talked with my business partner. We went in as a group. We did use somebody kind of local.
Did you set it up like a shared family office?
No, so they treat us as a family office when it comes to their fees, but all of our investments are separate.
Got it. And so does that person work just for you two?
No.
Got it.
They probably have 500 million that they manage. We're their biggest clients for sure. But so we went to them. Right now I have about 58% of my net wealth of, my proceeds from my sale is in a portfolio manager with those guys. They have 40% in alternative investments. So REITs, commercial bonds, not government bonds, like commercial bonds, investments in like storage units, these type of things that you can't buy through the market, through the publicly traded market. 50% I'm in just index funds, mainly in the S&P. I have a little bit of Canadian index funds that I've purchased as well. I got about 5% in cash, and then I'm 5%, global equities exposure, primarily through ETFs. So that's kind of my portfolio of my 58% that I gave those guys. I've spent 17%. We invested in rec property.
So that gets us to 75%. So where's the other 25?
I met a guy golfing early on in my career, and he really just impressed me as like, this guy, if I could ever do business with this guy, I'm all in, right? And so he called me up like 4 months later and just said, hey, do you want to buy 20% of my business? He had another partner. So I ended up buying 20% of a commercial real estate portfolio. I have 7.5% in kind of my own private equity deal that I did down in the States, where I made one investment with a lifelong friend who's just a killer. He's done, $2.5 billion of sales in his career. He's starting a wellness company in the peptide space. Hasn't launched that yet, but he's a horse that I'm like, if he ever is he called me up one day and said, hey, I'm going to do this.
Now, I want to say something very clear. I'm not saying I would do this, but I do think what I'm about to say is going to be tempting for a lot of people. I looked it up, and Travis's town's operating budget for 2024 was just under $6 million. With $50 million in net worth, Travis could have a lot of influence in his town. And we're talking politically, of course. He could influence a lot of politicians, I would imagine. Now, I'm talking perfectly legal stuff, but look, if your town is that small and you have that much money, this is something that is at least fun to think about. But of course, when you live in a town like this, if you want to do things the right way and you want to be harmonious and respectful of the town and the people inside of it, that means resisting the urge to have things your way all the time.
I think if somebody came into a small town, any small town, and tried to throw their weight around with money, I think that would poison the apple more than it would help. There are things that I'm interested in the town, and I can provide support, but it's all volunteer. Our politicians all take a lot of time, and I've never wanted to run for politics in my town because I know that they get a lot of complaints about a lot of things that would drive me crazy and really don't make a difference. That's something I would never attempt.
But that's not to say he doesn't have significant impact on his community.
The biggest pro for me is I think when you're in a big market and you create jobs, you see them at the office or you see them at a company event, and that's it. You don't really see the positive effect that you can have when you do create jobs. And so we live in a community where, I'm seeing people that we hired and trained who were just out of college now buying their first house, or their kids are playing sports with my kid and they're going on vacation. You see the job creation and what that does to their lives. Not that they earned it. They worked hard. They deserve every penny they got. But
you played some, whether small or big, some part in that.
I think the part that I am most proud about is I get to play the part in where they're working, right? That they're actually in my small town. They're wanting to raise their kids here. And the only way they could do that was through our company, right? They could go to a bigger city and make more money or as much money. But in order to live here, we have been able to bring a lot of people back to our community who wanted to move back but didn't have the opportunity. We had a company barbecue once and had some bouncy houses, and this was like pre-COVID. And it was like overwhelming. Like I had to kind of step back and tell my wife, there's like 150 people and all these kids. And I just felt like all this weight, like I better not screw up. Like the decisions I make matter. And it just really really stressed me out there for a few minutes, just seeing the impact that we've been able to have on our small town. We actually converted the old folks home in our town, which the government, our provincial government, was building a new old folks home. And so they're going to tear this one down, and we took it over and renovated it. So I'm literally like working in these offices where like people will come and be like, oh, my grandma this was her room, or this, So yeah, we own our building here in town.
I mean, that's just so cool to be in a place where you're 2 minutes from your house, you own the building. It probably has like almost a miniature campus type of vibe. Like everyone knows what you guys are about. You could have your children hanging out in the area. I mean, that's a great feeling. And in order to pull that off in different parts of the country, prices are different. So if you're like in the outskirts of LA or something, it's like, dude, it's like, this is like a $15 million building. Like it's prohibitively expensive. And I got to pay each person like $250,000. It's just impossible to pull this off. Like I want to pull it off. And so it makes a lot of sense to be in a smaller town where you're like, this is amazing. I could pull all of this off. I bet 70 grand where you live is a very awesome wage. And you're like, I can make way enough revenue per employee to account for that.
Yeah, the cost of living's lower. I don't think if I had, an office building in New York that I was renting, I'd be able to have my kids be the janitors or my son mow the lawn to give him some work experience, right? So those type of the things, my kids have, and my business partners' kids have access to the building. They'll come over here late at night with their friends, play pool, drink, pop from the pop machine, and just hang out in their dad's office, right? That's kind of cool. So
that's awesome. That's more than cool. To me, that's like the meaning of life.
Yeah. So Sam, I grew up, my dad was a teacher. And so I wasn't really exposed. I was always taught, like, get a job with benefits. 5 kids, I grew up. My dad was a teacher, taught 6th grade for like 30 years. My grandpa, however, he was a business owner. He owned a factory here in town. I remember as a kid going over to visit grandpa at his office, and he would walk through the factory and he would just be like high, like so happy. And he'd be like, all the workers would come up. Hey, how you doing? He would tell me, oh, we have 120 people working here. He was so proud of employing these people, right? That business, over time kind of, petered out and went out of business. And so when we were starting our business, I'm like, I want my kids to be able to come over to where I work. I want my kids to like walk through and like talk to my employees. I wanted that same experience of my grandpa. And so unfortunately, he passed away kind of right before we took off. I would love for him to see what we did. He would have been proud of the money. He would have been happy about the success, but he mostly would have been like so pumped that I have an office and that I employ all these people and kind of the next generation doing it.
Dude, I think you're convincing me that I need to go to a smaller town because like it is just must bring so much joy. And like building a business that does like 10 million, let's say, in revenue is not like terribly challenging. You give someone 5 years or 10 years, like it's a fairly straightforward. It's not guaranteed, but like it's in 10 million, you're way above that. But let's just say 10 million, that's doable. 10 million can afford, depending on where you live, like 30 people, 30 employees at a really good wage. And you're like the mayor of the town. And you're like, look, like I am partially responsible for these 30 people's like employment. That I know they can buy homes. I know they can get whatever they want at the grocery store. I know they can go out to dinner, and I know they can take vacations around here and do cool stuff. And that joy, I think, is so great versus $10 million in San Francisco, where it's like, dude, the average home here is 1.5. Like my employees are complaining to me that like they can't buy a house, and there's nothing I can do. My business model does not, the margins don't support this. I can't pay one person 600 grand.
And it's because I live where I live and we live off of what we live off of, I'm paying less taxes. Sam, I'm not distributing out as much money for my investments that I need and then paying a way higher personal tax bill every year because I can afford to live on less.
Travis has seen a ton of benefits from keeping his business in town, and he's certain others will follow suit.
I think there's a trend. I think we're going to see more and more businesses move to the smaller, and it doesn't have to be a small town, but like a smaller city center. COVID obviously changed the game with there. When that happened, instead of hiring as many people as we could locally, we were hiring all over the country. Remote works helped. I think your core people, though, especially in a startup, you need to be face-to-face. And I think the smaller.
Yeah, like a Louisville or something.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
Whoever, a Baltimore, something, St. Louis, where I'm from, like something of that caliber where it's like there's some amenities and also you can get a great house for 350 grand or 400 grand.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so I'm from Missouri, and where I'm from, a lot of people, they don't really tend to get out. They just stay where they are in Missouri, and that's totally fine as long as it's what makes them happy, power to them. But because I left and because I've had a few successes that have been fairly public, at least within my little area, when I go home, I have to admit, I sometimes feel like a big shot. And I know this is just me talking with a huge ego, but when you do come from a small place and you accomplish some things on a national scale, it feels kind of impactful. It feels like if I moved back to my town, I could kind of be a big deal. But on the other end of that spectrum, when you live in a big place like New York or San Francisco, where I have, along with Austin, even if you've done some amazing things, you feel really small. Like you need to be doing more or have more. And the people who have the biggest difference in a place like New York or LA, at least in terms of giving away money and having impact, they're billionaires or they're worth tens of billions. And so it makes it feel like even if you've accomplished something amazing like $50 million at the age of like 45, sometimes you feel small in these cities. And these kinds of places can make us feel like we constantly need to level up. It can make $50 million feel like nothing. And I think that's insane. I put myself through it, but I still think it's insane. And so by Travis staying where he is, he gets to live large, provide for his family and his community, and have an impact in ways that he probably could not in a bigger city.
You know, if we're looking at wealth where it's just a balance sheet, you know, straight numbers, then yeah, like I'll never be as wealthy as a lot of people in a big city center. But wealth to me is lifestyle. When I look at what makes me wealthy or not, the money is obviously important because it creates opportunity, it creates freedom for us to like travel and do these things as a family. But I'd rather have my family and my lifestyle here being worth a tenth of it in a big city and not have any kids. I'd be miserable if I was my age with no kids and I had 10 times the wealth on paper. I wouldn't consider myself wealthy. I would just consider myself rich.
Of course, living that remotely in the middle of nowhere, hours from a big city, it definitely has its downsides.
I got to drive 2 hours to the nearest large international airport, which, you know, sucks. You do a trip and then you got to drive 2 hours, but it's a small sacrifice for being able to put roots here and live where I want to live.
And another concern I had about raising my kids in such an isolated area. Having grown up in not a big city, I understand that culture exposure and opportunity to world-class amenities is largely off the table when you live in a place like Travis where he lives. And a lot of times I think I want my kids to have exposure to those things. And so I pressed Travis on this, and he had a really good and simple answer.
That's why we travel. That's why we take our kids on trips. They've been able to go to a lot of cool countries, see a lot of different cultures.
So instead of living close to those things, he gets to use his money to provide those experiences to his kids while at the same time keeping them in a more realistic and down-to-earth environment. Now, I think there's 1,000 ways to get this done. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, this Travis, he's a redneck, he's a dummy, he needs to be in the city so he can experience this and that and yada, yada, yada. Take it easy. There's a lot of great ways to do it. Travis's way is one way, and it seems to be working for him. But I still think you could do it in a city. I still think you could be happy anywhere. It's just interesting to hear his opinion. Now, I said at the beginning of this episode, this is everyone's dream. And the reason I said that is this is something I think about a ton. And when I tweeted this out, I basically said, I just got off the podcast with a guy who made around $50 million in a 2,500 person town. He owns the biggest office in the town, and he's sort of a big shot. He gets to provide for his community. He gets to provide for his family. And it went viral. I think hundreds of thousands of people saw it, and they got lots of comments. And the most common thought was, this is my dream. And for years, I personally have had this dream. And so it's funny that so many other young men have also dreamed of this because it feels good to be a big shot. It feels good to take care of your community. It feels good to kind of feel like a patriarch. That is a great feeling. And when you're living in a big city like New York or San Francisco or whatever, it seems like impossible to get there because in order to do that, you have to make billions and billions of dollars. And a lot of people listening, they're going to think, well, $50 million is still a lot of money. I'm never going to be able to do that. I can tell you we've had this podcast and I've had lots of other podcasts. I've talked to dozens and dozens and hundreds of people who have done that. And making $5, $10, $20 million, it's not out of this world if you're willing to work for 10 or 20 years. Making $1 billion, it definitely seems really hard. And so I think that this dream, even though for a lot of people making $50 million seems insane, if you're listening to Moneywise, you're definitely ambitious. And I think there's a chance you could pull it off if you give it enough time. So that makes this dream seem a lot more attainable. And it's really, really fun. And it's really exciting to hear Travis talk about this. And so I want to hear what you think. Is there any part of you after hearing Travis speak that wants to just pack it all up and go to a small town? Or if you already live in a small town, what do you think? Is this something that is actually true for you? Do you want to pack it up and move to a big city instead? I want to know your thoughts. So tweet at me. I'm at the Sam Parr. Again, that's the Sam Parr on Twitter. Let me know your thoughts. And so that's today's episode. Before we go, I want to say a quick thing. Most of the guests that we have for Moneywise, not all, but most, they come from Hampton. Hampton is my community. It's a community of founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs. Most of the folks are doing something like tens of millions in revenue, but we have people ranging from like 3 or 4 million all the way up to hundreds of millions. And we have conversations like this podcast are having. Like we have these conversations all the time. We also do a monthly core meeting. So you and 8 people are in a core group that meets once a month and they all have similar sizes and types of businesses as you. And we have hundreds of in-person events throughout the year. And so if you're listening to Moneywise, that means you like these transparent types of conversations. That's exactly what Hampton is. So check it out, joinhampton.com. And of course, I have to give a shout out to Lower Street, lowerstreet.co. They are the folks that I've paid to create this podcast. They make it so easy. So if you want a podcast like this, which by the way, it's been quite profitable if I'm being honest for Hampton. If you want a podcast like this, check them out, lowerstreet.co. They're going to make making a podcast like this incredibly easy.